And here is a picture of the Massachusetts, which was the first Coast Guard cutter. And what happened was in 1789, President Washington went to Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of the Treasury. And he said to Hamilton, "We don't have any money in our treasury. We just fought the Revolutionary War, and it's hard for me to manage the country with no money." So Alexander Hamilton said, "Well, I have an idea. Why don't we create Coast Guard cutters, small vessels, which will go up and down the coast of the colonies and collect excise taxes. They could also stop smuggling." So this was an idea to actually collect taxes, stop smuggling, and put some money in the national treasury. It was started in 1790. It was called the Revenue Cutter Service. The word Coast Guard was not used till 1915. So there are about 10 vessels of the first fleet of the coast of the Revenue Cutter Service. And the Massachusetts was the first one to be built and launched. And it was built in Newburyport. And here is the Revenue Cutter Massachusetts. It was 60 feet long, a crew of about 8, had 6 small guns, and they went up and down the coast of New England, making sure that excise taxes were collected. Alexander Hamilton, we're looking at a picture of him now, was the Secretary of the Treasury, as we said. He was also very knowledgeable in trade. He had grown up in the West Indies, and he had seen ships come in and come out, many from Newburyport, I would add. And so he knew that there was a lot of trade going on and a lot of smuggling. He was also a very brilliant man, and he is called the father of the Coast Guard. There have been numerous vessels named the Hamilton. There's a dorm at the Coast Guard Academy named the Hamilton. So his name resonates through the Coast Guard. Here's a monument to the Coast Guard being started in Newburyport. It is down on the wharf in Newburyport. And I must say, I must have walked past it for 10 years before realizing what it said. So we don't get, even in Newburyport, we haven't given it a lot of visibility, but the Coast Guard did start here. Here's another photo from the Newburyport waterfront. If you're listening, what we're looking at is the Harbor Master headquarters to the right, and there's a memorial to fishermen who have died out of Newburyport since 2000. There are 7 names on the plaque. 7 fishermen went out from Newburyport and never came back. And several years ago, this memorial was rebuilt, and it really does a good service. And the waterfront has improved much over the years if you're from this area. Now, more than 1,500 vessels are registered in Newburyport each year. That's a lot. Some are fishing vessels, only about a dozen. Most of them are pleasure vessels. But since the water became cleaner year after year, there's a lot of boating to be done in Newburyport. One of the most significant stories of the Atlantic in recent years, and the Coast Guard was very instrumental on this one, was the sinking of the Bounty. The Bounty was a tall ship with strong ties to New England, and it sank off the coast of North Carolina in 2012. The vessel had been built in 1960 for the movie Mutiny on the Bounty, Marlon Brando starred, and then had been refurbished that fall up in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine. It was being taken to Florida, where it was going to be used as a tourist attraction. Now, Superstorm Sandy was in the news that fall in 2012. And so people knew that a big storm was coming. And yet the captain of the vessel wanted to take it to Florida, meet an economic, have a meeting with people who are going to help fund his operation. So he started going south just when Sandy was about to hit. This is the captain, the late captain, Captain Robin Wallbridge. He was a native of Vermont. He was captain of the Bounty, and he ignored hurricane warnings. He died, as did one other person, Claudine Christian, and you can see her here. She was 42. She was from California, and she wanted to have a bit of an adventure. She had signed on for about 6 months and just thought she'd be a crew member, and that would be a very interesting thing. So as it turned out, the storm hit, the vessel was in bad shape, and the captain, in addition to making a bad decision and going to Florida during Hurricane Sandy, or Superstorm Sandy, he also is very slow to call the Coast Guard. People say if he had called 12 hours earlier or 18 hours earlier, things would have been much better. As it turns out, Claudine Christian, her body was recovered, and she was sped to a hospital in North Carolina, but she did not survive. And curiously, she was a distant relative of Fletcher Christian, who was the captain of the Bounty, the ship that is known in folklore and in the movie Mutiny on the Bounty. Here is one of the Coast Guard heroes of the day, Jane Pena, who was she's standing in front of her helicopter, and every day, coasties are ready to go out to sea. But when she got a call at 5 a.m. in the morning, this was unusual because they said, get ready, you're going out. We have a sinking ship. Now, she was in North Carolina. She is experienced. And then I interviewed her. I wrote a book, incidentally, called New England Coast Guard Stories. And I asked her, well, Jane, what's it like to get, a call at 5 in the morning and said, you're going out in a very significant storm? And so she said, well, we're trained for that. We know what to do. And we've, had numerous training sessions and getting up early, rushing out. And so we were ready for it in the sense we had trained. But then, of course, as they started getting into the storm, they saw how significant it was. It was, 50-foot waves, probably 60 to 70 knots of wind, and it was a very serious storm. So they found the Bounty about 50 miles off the coast of North Carolina. Here you see a photo of a rescuer being lowered into the Atlantic. And 14 of the 16 crew members were saved by the Coast Guard. So this is why I'm saying this was a high moment for the Coast Guard, and they've had high moments in other places as well. Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans was one. Also, a 9/11, as we started to talking about. Here's an example of what it looks like. Now, this picture is a facsimile, but this is one of the toughest jobs in the Coast Guard, and that is of a swimmer or an in-the-water rescue specialist. So the swimmer is lowered down from the chopper and dropped into the water. The first thing that has to happen, the swimmer has to get his bearings, clear his mask, and then start for the people who are in lifeboats. Now, it was fortunate in this situation, there were 2 lifeboats holding the people who had left the ship, and both lifeboats had canvas tops. So this was fortunate, so the water wouldn't be coming in all the time. I mean, they were bailing, but nevertheless, they were not getting as much water as you might think. And there's also several survivors were adrift in survival suits. So you had 2 lifeboats, and several people in survival suits. It was, a very, very difficult situation. And 14 of 16 were saved. So that was a high moment for the Coast Guard. And people are still talking about that. As it turned out, the captain was not found. And I think some people initially said, well, maybe the captain went down with the ship. That's a tradition in some cultures. But during the hearing that the Coast Guard held several months later, a couple of his friends said, he did not go down with the ship. He had too much to live for. Yes, he may have made a mistake, but he had a wife, he had a couple children. He was 63 years of age, and he had a lot to live for. So some people speculated that he had gone below decks one more time to make sure everybody was out, and perhaps got caught below decks and in some kind of situation where he could not escape the vessel. Now, just to reiterate, the vessel did have good computer gear. They had a weather cast. They had good communications with the Coast Guard. So as historians look back on this, it does seem to be one event that could have been, first of all, avoided if he had not gone all the way down to Florida. And secondly, if he had called the Coast Guard sooner. When we talk about the Coast Guard, this photo we're looking at is from about 1892 off Plum Island. And there were scores of shipwrecks off Plum Island. And there's several reasons for that. The opening to Newburyport Harbor is very narrow. Also, the water is very shallow. Also, before the age of power vessels, it was difficult to get a vessel of sail into the harbor. And so here is a picture of a rescue off of Plum Island. A beautiful photo. I almost thought it had been, a facsimile or a drawing, but I've been assured that this was a photo and this took place in 1892. Another major rescue effort in Long Island, in New England, was in 1952. The vessel Mercer went down off of Cape Cod, and the Coast Guard was there for that as well. They made several daring rescues. 32 crew members were rescued, one perished, and this was brought forth in a movie you may have seen, The Finest Hours. But the Coast Guard rescued 32 of 33 in a sinking vessel off of Cape Cod. We're looking at a photo of a Coast Guard vessel coming towards a pleasure boat off of Newburyport. And it's really more of the thing that the Coast Guard does on an everyday basis. Frequently, a ship will lose its motor or it won't be able to, operate the sails. And so the Coast Guard will approach the vessel as it's doing here and make sure everyone's safe and secure. If that's the case, then they will call a third party to tow the vessel in. The Coast Guard does not tow as many vessels as they used to, in part because they're more involved in drug smuggling, trying to stop that. They're more involved in security. They're trying to make sure the shores are free and safe, but they will call a third party to tow a vessel. Joshua James is one of the first of the old lifesavers. He lived in Hull, Massachusetts. He lived, in the 19th century and saved many folks who were adrift or unable to make it back to the shore. Here's a photo of Ida Lewis from Newport, Rhode Island. She was a lifesaver from her teen years, and she is also mid-19th century and was one of the first women who was a lifesaver. Her family lived on a lighthouse out in the harbor of Newport, so she was one of the first women who saved lives. Here's a photo that depicts Ida throwing a life raft or a rope to someone and pulling them out of the tumultuous sea. In 1915, as we mentioned, the Coast Guard was so named. What happened was the life-saving service merged with the revenue cutter service in 1915 to constitute the Coast Guard. And in 1939, the lighthouse service was added. Here is one of the leaders in the political sense. His name is Sumner Kimball, and he was one who put together the package in 1915 to actually merge 3 agencies into the Coast Guard. Women entered the Coast Guard in about 1918. Here is a photo of the Baker twins, they're twin sisters, and they started as assistants in Washington, D.C. in 1918. The Coast Guard was involved in a lot of activity during Prohibition. From 1920 to 1933, when Prohibition existed, they went up and down the New England coast and tried to stop smugglers and did a successful job. And here is a photo. You can see cases of rum on the left and a vessel that was pulled over and brought to Boston Harbor by the Coast Guard. Getting back to women, many women joined the Coast Guard during World War II. Several thousand were joined and active in administration, but also other activities such as weather and reconnaissance. So women were very active during the war. Now, in 1946, almost every woman was mustered out of the service. So it went from having thousands during the war, and then they got rid of just about everybody. Now, in 1976, the Coast Guard began taking women. That was the first year that women entered the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. Today, there are 92,000 people in the Coast Guard. About 15% are women, which is small by percentage, but probably 5,000 to 7,000 women are in the Coast Guard today. Here is one of the great sights of New England. This is a picture of the Eagle. It's a tall ship built by the Germans in the 30s, taken as a war prize in 1946. And the Coast Guard uses this vessel to train cadets and young people on how to navigate by the stars and how to handle a ship in the wind. Here's another wonderful shot of the Eagle. Here's a chopper that is also an important part of the Coast Guard. Since choppers became in play, and this was only in the mid-40s, I should say, some of us have grown up seeing helicopters and military helicopters and Coast Guard helicopters, but they only became prominent in the 40s. They were invented by Igor Sikorsky in the early 40s, and the Coast Guard started using them in about 1945. And here is kind of what we're talking about. A vessel, a small Coast Guard vessel, is out in New York Harbor and actually watching the events. And if you're listening on the radio, this is actually a shot of one of the World Trade Center towers, being consumed by fire. And the Coast Guard is waiting its chance and getting ready to go rescue people. And it was one of the very large days for the Coast Guard, and of course, the nation. It was a tragic event. Now, you're listening to the podcast, Life Along the Merrimack. I'm Dyke Hendrickson, the host, 96.3 FM Joppa Radio and local Channel 9 cable TV. In writing my book, I interviewed a lot of coasties. Here's Patrick Brown. He was the commanding officer at Station Merrimack on Water Street. There are about 26 coasties on Water Street in the Coast Guard building. They do not stay overnight. They live in the community. Of course, if there's an event or an emergency, they can stay overnight, but they do not dorm up. Paul Rooney is of Newburyport. He is a logistics officer in the Coast Guard. He is also part owner of Bob Lobster on the way down to Plum Island. Commander John Christensen was captain of the 270-foot Seneca, birthed in Boston, and he started his career in the Navy and left after 3 years and joined the Coast Guard. And when I interviewed him for my book, I said, gee, the Navy, why did you leave the Navy? He said, well, unless there's a war on, there's not that much to do in the Navy except train and watch the vessel. But in the Coast Guard, things are different every day. You can help out someone having trouble in a vessel. You can join in security efforts along the coast. You can give classes to adults on boat safety. So he said, there's a lot more to do in the Coast Guard. Megan Cahoon, shown here, was an officer, a non-commissioned officer, when I interviewed her in Rockland, Maine. She had gone to Ohio Wesleyan University. She wants to be a teacher eventually, and she did a lot of work in Rockland, Maine. Here's a couple vessels in Rockland, and here's a Coast Guard vessel and a joint exercise also in Rockland, Maine. Rockland has a very large presence, in part because the Maine coast is so long. Lieutenant Commander Karen Kukowitz was an admiral's aide in Boston when I interviewed her. She's shown here in Boston. She got shipped out to Alaska, and then last I heard, she was in Mobile shipping out for areas off of South America. So if you join the Coast Guard, some people take desk jobs and maybe go out once, and then you're on shore. That is not a quick way to get ahead. If you want your career to move along, you generally are out to sea. Commander Valerie Boyd was in New Haven when I talked to her. She was third in command of the 60-person unit, and she is a very versatile person. She was had a big job during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and she has a big job in New Haven. And I said, gee, in 20 years, you've done a great deal. You're a real multitasker. And I said, do you have anything else you would mention? She said, well, during the past time, I've also managed, my husband and I have also managed to have 3 little girls, and I'm picking them up at 4:30 today. So I thought, wow, she certainly gets a lot done. Here's Lieutenant Bob Craighead from the Newburyport area. He asked me to come down because he was signing off from the Coast Guard. He was retiring at the Maritime Museum several years ago. So I said, Bob, why do you want me to come down? He said, because you used the photo on your book about the Coast Guard about a 47-foot rescue vessel on high seas, and I was in command of that. So here is a photo of a 47-footer on the North Shore in high seas. Everyone's buckled in. No one was lost. People know how to do this. And this vessel, this is a very impressive thing. If it turns over, if it tips over in such high seas, it will turn over and come back up just like a bottle or something like that, and it'll still be running. And I said, could this be true, Bob? And he said, yep, it is true. A friend of mine was on one of those vessels that had a new captain. He was trying to qualify for his position, and the boat went over, but it came up right side up. It was still running, and everything else was fine, except, of course, the ego of this young guy who was trying to qualify. So we're just about finished. This is 96.3 Joppa Radio, Channel 9 on television. I am Dyke Hendrickson. This is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. Here's a wonderful shot of the Escanaba, which is a Coast Guard vessel. The crew is about 100. It goes out for 4 to 6 months at a time. In recent years, it's been going off the coast of South America and through the Panama Canal, and it has been stopping vessels and has captured over 1,000 pounds of cocaine and other drugs. So the Coast Guard has gotten very active in drug connections. Here's the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. At the top of the frame, you can see the ship Eagle that we talked about earlier. The Coast Guard Academy now is 40% women and is certainly one of the great institutions of New England. People, it's hard to get into, but unlike the other academies, you do not have to have a congressional sponsor. So it takes a little of the political juice out of it. When I was going to high school, a couple kids wanted to go to West Point or the Naval Academy, but they didn't know any Congress representatives, and so they had a very hard time. But for the Coast Guard Academy, you do not have to have a congressional sponsor. This is the last slide for the day. I think I could have talked for an hour today because since I wrote the book about the Coast Guard, I've done a lot more research and I have a lot more to talk about. But we are at about the end of the session. Here is the Coast Guard Station Merrimack River in Newburyport. And as we say, it hosts about 26 coasties. Until 1973, it was at the north end of Plum Island, but a storm came in, it wiped most of the wooden Coast Guard center away. And federal officials said, looking through history, the Coast Guard has been wiped out half a dozen times on Plum Island by storms and erosion. So let's put this inside the city. And right now it is on Water Street in Newburyport, very close to where the Massachusetts was created. And on August 4th, each year, it has a special day where young people and others who are interested in the Coast Guard can walk through the building, get on a vessel, and have a good time. So this is Dyke Hendrickson. The podcast is Life Along the Merrimack. We talked about the Coast Guard today because it was very active in 9/11, which were the 20th anniversary of which we are approaching. It saved many lives during 9/11 and has really had some very important activity during Hurricane Katrina, during many different situations on the coast. So we'll be back next week. We are observing September 11th later in the week. That's why we talked about the Coast Guard. We'll be back next week to talk again. And as I say, this is Dyke Hendrickson. The podcast is Life Along the Merrimack, and this is 96.3 radio and 90 and also Channel 9 TV. We'll talk again and talk about the history and health of the Merrimack River. Thank you.